What if the strongest desire inside you was never wrong, only silenced? There is something deep within you that has been waiting a long time to be acknowledged, not praised, not justified, just seen. It is a quiet intensity, a pull that never fully goes away, no matter how much you try to ignore it. You feel it in moments of silence, in the pause after you say yes when you wanted to say no, in the heaviness that comes when you realize you are living carefully instead of honestly. This desire is not about chaos or rebellion. It is about truth, your truth. From early on, you learned how to adapt. You learned what earned approval and what invited resistance. You learned when to soften your voice, when to smile, when to make yourself smaller so others would feel comfortable. And slowly, without anyone ever saying it out loud, you learned that some parts of you were safer when hidden. So you did what humans are wired to do. You survived. You adjusted. You contained yourself. But psychology tells us something important. What is suppressed does not disappear. It waits. It stores energy. It grows pressure. That desire inside you did not fade with time. It sharpened. It matured. It became more intense because it was never allowed air. And now it shows up as restlessness, as frustration you cannot fully explain, as a feeling that something important is missing even when everything looks fine on the outside. This is not weakness, this is not confusion, this is awareness trying to break through conditioning. The desire to be fully seen, fully expressed, fully chosen without performing or pretending, the desire to exist without editing yourself for safety, to want deeply without guilt, to take up space without apology. This desire lives at the core of your identity because the human nervous system is built for authenticity. When who you are and how you live do not match, the body feels it, the mind feels it, the soul feels it. And here is the truth most people never tell you. The discomfort you feel is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a signal that something true inside you wants to come back online. You were not born to mute yourself. You were trained to. And training can be unlearned. If you stay with this message, if you allow yourself to listen instead of turning away, something powerful happens. You begin to understand that this desire is not dangerous. It is directional. It points you toward alignment, toward confidence that does not need permission, toward peace that does not come from pleasing, but from honoring yourself. By the end of this journey, you will not just recognize this desire. You will understand why it exists, why it feels so intense, and why hiding it has cost you more than you realized. You will begin to feel relief, not because someone gave you answers, but because you finally stopped questioning your own inner truth. This is the moment where silence starts to break, and when it does, everything begins to shift. That inner shift begins the moment you realize this desire was never created by impulse, but shaped by suppression. It was not born wild, it was made intense by being restrained. When a human being is repeatedly taught that expressing truth leads to tension, rejection, or disapproval, the nervous system adapts. It does not ask whether the rule is fair. It only asks whether it is safe, and so safety becomes silence. Compliance becomes protection. Over time, this pattern hardens into identity, and what once felt natural begins to feel risky. Psychology explains this clearly. When a behavior is punished or ignored, the brain learns to associate it with threat. Not danger in the dramatic sense, but emotional danger. Discomfort, disconnection, loss of approval. The mind begins to predict pain before it happens, and that prediction alone is enough to shut you down. This is how power gets mistaken for guilt. This is how desire turns into something you feel you must justify instead of honor. You were praised for being agreeable. You were rewarded for being understanding. You were subtly corrected when you were direct, firm, or unapologetic. Each moment may have felt small, but repetition builds belief, and belief shapes behavior. Eventually, you stopped asking what you wanted and started asking what would keep the peace. Not because you were weak, but because you were intelligent. You learned how to read the room, how to sense emotional temperature, how to adjust yourself to avoid friction. But here is the cost few talk about. When you constantly adapt outwardly, you slowly disconnect inwardly. Your intuition grows quieter, your preferences blur, your boundaries soften. And that desire inside you begins to feel heavy, almost inconvenient, because it does not fit the version of you that was approved. This is where guilt takes root. Not because the desire is wrong, but because it conflicts with the role you were taught to play. The brain hates conflict, especially internal conflict. So it looks for a solution. Often, that solution is self-silencing. You tell yourself you are asking for too much. You downplay your needs. You rationalize your dissatisfaction. You become skilled at explaining away your own feelings. And from the outside, it can look like strength, like maturity, like self-control. But inside, something is tightening. Research shows that long-term emotional suppression does not erase emotion. It redirects it. The energy has to go somewhere. It turns into tension in the body, anxiety in the mind, fatigue in the spirit. You may find yourself exhausted by simple decisions, irritated without a clear reason, disconnected from joy even when life seems stable. This is not a personality flaw. It is the nervous system under chronic restraint. And still you keep going. Because you were taught that wanting less is safer than wanting honestly, that blending in is wiser than standing out, that restraint equals virtue. But the desire inside you does not accept these rules forever. It waits, it observes, it builds strength quietly, not to sabotage your life, but to restore balance. There comes a moment when the cost of hiding outweighs the comfort of approval, when the ache of self-betrayal becomes louder than the fear of expression. That moment is not dramatic, it is clear, and once you feel it, you cannot unfeel it, because something deep inside you knows the truth. You were never meant to live at half volume. And the part of you that wants more is not your enemy, it is your signal to come home to yourself. And when that signal is ignored, the conflict does not disappear, it turns inward. One part of you keeps pushing for honesty, expression, depth. Another part keeps pulling you back towards safety, predictability, approval. Both feel real, both feel necessary. This is where the internal war begins, and it drains more energy than any external struggle ever could. Psychology calls this cognitive dissonance. When your actions move in one direction and your inner truth pulls in another, the mind experiences stress, not loud stress, quiet stress, the kind that wears you down slowly. You start second-guessing yourself, you hesitate before speak. You replay conversations in your head, wondering why you didn't say what you felt. You feel strong one moment, invisible the next. This is not instability, it is misalignment. The brain is designed to conserve energy. When it senses constant internal conflict, it looks for relief. Often that relief comes from numbing. You stop expecting too much from yourself. You stop wanting too much from life. You convince yourself that comfort is enough, even when your body knows it is not. Over time, this creates emotional fatigue. You wake up tired, even after rest. You feel unmotivated, even when opportunities appear. Not because you lack drive, but because your drive has nowhere honest to go. This internal war weakens self-trust. When you repeatedly override your own signals, your intuition learns not to speak as loudly. You stop relying on your instincts and start relying on rules, on expectations, on what seems acceptable. And the more you do this, the harder it becomes to recognize yourself. You may look accomplished, responsible, put together. But inside, there is a dull ache, a sense that you are living slightly off-center. This is where the desire starts leaking out in other ways, through irritation that feels out of proportion, through resentment that surprises you, through emotional reactions that seem sudden but have been building for years. The mind can only contain so much before it looks for release. And when release does not come through expression, it comes through pressure. Your body knows this before your mind does. Tight shoulders, shallow breathing, a constant low-level tension. The nervous system stays alert, as if something important is being guarded, because it is your truth. The part of you that wants to be real instead of reasonable, alive instead of approved. This is why ignoring the desire never brings peace. It brings management, manner. Your feelings, your tone, your expectations. You become skilled at control but distant from ease. And deep down you sense the cost. You sense that you are spending energy just to stay contained. That life feels heavier than it should. Yet even here there is something powerful happening, awareness. The moment you recognize this internal battle, you stop blaming yourself. You stop asking what is wrong with you and start asking what is trying to be heard. That shift matters, because desire is not the enemy of stability, suppression is. The part of you that wants more is not trying to destroy what you have built. It is trying to make it honest. It is asking for integration, not upheaval. And the moment you stop fighting it, even just internally, the pressure begins to ease. Not because everything is solved, but because the war has been acknowledged. This is where transformation starts. Not with action, with recognition, with the understanding that the tension you feel is not a flaw to be fixed, but a message to be honored. And once you understand that, the desire no longer feels like a problem. It starts to feel like guidance. When you stop seeing this desire as a problem, something profound happens. The energy you once spent resisting it becomes available to understand it. And what you begin to note is this: the desire is not reckless. It is precise. It knows exactly what it wants because it is rooted in alignment. It is the part of you that recognizes when something fits and when something slowly drains you. It is not loud by nature. It only becomes loud when it is ignored. Neuroscience explains why this matters so deeply. When your actions align with your internal values, the brain releases chemicals linked to calm, focus, and motivation. When they don't, the brain stays on edge. That constant alertness is not strength, it is strain. Many people confuse endurance with resilience. But real resilience comes from congruence, from living in a way that does not require constant self-correction. This desire you were taught to hide is actually the source of your presence. Presence is not performance, it is coherence. When your thoughts, feelings, and actions move in the same direction, your energy changes. People feel it. You feel it. There is less noise in your head, less tension in your body. Decisions become clearer because you are no longer negotiating against yourself. This is why suppressing the desire never made you calmer. It made you guarded. It taught you how to manage perception, not how to experience peace. And over time, that management becomes exhausting. The mind grows tired of pretending nothing is missing. The body grows tired of holding what was never meant to be contained. The intensity of this desire is not a flaw, it is a signal of importance. The brain assigns intensity to what it believes is essential for survival and meaning. This is not about attention or validation. It is about integrity, about living in a way that does not fracture you internally. When that integrity is compromised, the system protests, quietly at first, then more insistently. This is why moments of authenticity feel relieving, even when they are uncomfortable, even when they challenge old patterns. Because the nervous system recognizes truth, it relaxes when it senses alignment. That relief you feel when you finally say what you mean or admit what you want is not coincidence. It is biological confirmation. The desire you are reconnecting with is not asking you to fight the world. It is asking you to stop fighting yourself. It does not demand chaos. It demands clarity. And clarity is powerful. It cuts through confusion. It dissolves self-doubt. It replaces second-guessing with direction. This is where confidence actually comes from. Not from forcing boldness, but from removing contradiction. When you are no longer split between who you are and who you present, your energy stabilizes. You don't need to prove yourself. You don't need to explain yourself. Your presence does the work. And here is the deeper truth. The desire was never wild because it was dangerous. It was labeled wild because it was free. Free from conditioning, free from roles, free from permission. Freedom threatens systems that rely on compliance. So it was framed as something to control, something to tame, something to hide. But freedom is not the opposite of stability. It is the foundation of it. A life built on suppression will always require maintenance. A life built on alignment sustains itself. And the moment you begin to feel this distinction, even subtly, you understand why this desire refuses to disappear. It is not here to disrupt your life. It is here to give it back its weight, its depth, its truth. And once you recognize that, you stop trying to silence it. You start listening. Because something inside you knows that what you are reclaiming is not excess, it is essence. And yet, even with this understanding, the habit of hiding does not release its grip easily. Because suppression did not only shape your behavior, it shaped your biology. When you spend years minimizing yourself, your nervous system adapts to a smaller range of expression. It learns to stay alert, to scan for reaction, to brace for correction. This is why expressing desire can feel physically uncomfortable at first. Your heart races, your chest tightens, your mind looks for reasons to retreat. This is not intuition warning you. It is conditioning resisting change. Science is clear on this. Chronic emotional suppression increases stress hormones in the body. Cortisol stays elevated, muscles remain tense, breathing becomes shallow. Over time, your body forgets what ease feels like. It confuses tension with normal. So when you begin to reconnect with your desire, the system reacts. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are doing something unfamiliar. This is the hidden cost of hiding for too long. You lose access to your natural rhythm. Rest does not fully restore you. Pleasure feels muted. Motivation feels inconsistent. You may push yourself harder, hoping discipline will fix what alignment could heal. But effort cannot replace honesty, and control cannot replace connection. The longer desire is contained, the more energy it requires to keep it that way. That energy has to come from somewhere. Often it comes from joy, from creativity, from intimacy. You may notice that life feels flatter than it should, that accomplishments don't land the way you expected, that even love feels conditional because you are not fully present inside yourself. This is where many people turn inward with blame. They assume they are ungrateful, too sensitive, too demanding, but the truth is simpler and more compassionate. You are tired of abandoning yourself. The psyche keeps track of every time you override your truth for the sake of harmony, and eventually it asks for repair. That request often arrives as discomfort, as dissatisfaction that cannot be fixed by changing circumstances, as a quiet insistence that something essential has been postponed for too long. This is not a crisis, it is a course correction, a signal that your system is ready for a different way of being. The cost of ignoring this signal is not immediate collapse. It is slow erosion of self-respect, of vitality, of clarity. You become functional but disconnected, capable but constrained, and because you can still perform, the damage is easy to dismiss. Until one day, the effort it takes to stay contained feels heavier than the risk of being seen. That is the moment when suppression stops working, not because you fail, but because you evolve. The nervous system can only tolerate misalignment for so long before it demands change. This is not punishment, it is intelligence. The body and mind working together to restore balance. And here is the part that matters most. Releasing this desire does not mean overwhelming the world with it. It means allowing it to exist without judgment inside you. It means listening instead of managing, allowing sensation instead of numbing, giving language to what you feel instead of dismissing it. When you do this, even gradually, the system begins to recalibrate. Stress responses soften, energy returns. You start to feel more present in your own life, not because everything outside has changed, but because you are no longer spending so much energy holding yourself back. The desire you were taught to hide does not destroy stability when acknowledged. It restores it. Because stability built on suppression is fragile, Stability built on truth is resilient. And the moment you begin to sense that difference in your body, you understand why this desire kept pressing forward all these years. It was never trying to take something from you. It was trying to give you yourself back. And giving yourself back to yourself begins quietly, not with dramatic declarations, but with internal permission. Permission to stop negotiating your truth down to something more convenient. Permission to feel without immediately correcting yourself. Psychology shows that self-validation is one of the fastest ways to restore inner coherence. When you acknowledge what you feel without judgment, the nervous system receives a signal of safety. And safety is what allows real change to take root. This is where many people misunderstand transformation. They think reclaiming desire means forcing bold actions or confronting everything at once. But the deepest shift happens before behavior ever changes. It happens the moment you stop treating your inner voice like a liability. When you stop asking whether your feelings are acceptable and start asking whether they are honest. That shift alone begins to rewire how you relate to yourself. The desire you are reclaiming does not need to be proven. It needs to be trusted. Trust builds gradually. Each time you listen instead of dismissing. Each time you pause instead of overriding. Each time you choose alignment over appeasement. These moments may seem small, but the brain registers them as evidence. Evidence that you are safe to be real. Evidence that authenticity does not automatically lead to loss. As this trust grows, something stabilizes inside you. Your boundaries strengthen without aggression. Your voice steadies without force. You stop explaining yourself as much, not because you don't care, but because you are no longer unsure. This is the quiet confidence that comes from internal agreement. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions begin to support one another instead of compete, you may notice that relationships shift. Not because you demand change, but because you are no longer contorting yourself to maintain connection. Some connections deepen, others fade. This is not failure, it is calibration. The system adjusts to truth. What aligns remains. What doesn't slowly loses its grip. There is also grief here, grief for the years spent hiding, for the energy invested in being palatable instead of present. This grief is not weakness, it is integration. The psyche processes what it no longer needs to carry. Allow it. Suppressing grief only recreates the same pattern in a different form. As you integrate this desire, your sense of direction sharpens. Decisions feel less draining. You recover faster from disappointment. You stop needing constant reassurance because your internal reference point is stronger. Research shows that people who act in alignment with their values experience higher resilience and lower anxiety, not because life gets easier, but because inner conflict decreases. This is what it means to reclaim power without aggression, to stand without pushing, to choose without forcing. The desire that once felt dangerous now feels grounding. It roots you in yourself. It gives your energy somewhere honest to flow. And something else happens. Attraction changes, not in a superficial way, but in a fundamental one. When you are internally aligned, your presence becomes calm and unmistakable. People respond to coherence, to someone who is not trying to be more or less than they are. This is not something you perform, it is something you embody. You realize that hiding was never humility, it was fear dressed as virtue, and reclaiming desire is not selfish, it is responsible. Because when you are aligned, you no longer project unmet needs outward. You no longer ask others to complete what you have denied in yourself. This is the return to center, the place where effort softens into intention, where discipline is replaced by clarity, where desire no longer feels like pressure, but like guidance. And the more you live from this place, the less you recognize the version of yourself that once believed silence was the price of safety. You begin to understand that what you were taught to hide was not excess, it was truth. And truth, once reclaimed, does not ask for permission. It simply stands. And when you stand in that truth long enough, something irreversible takes place. You stop returning to the old version of yourself, not because you reject her, but because you no longer need her defenses. The constant scanning for approval quiets. The urge to explain fades. Your RVU system begins to recognize a new baseline, calm without suppression, strength without armor. This is where everything changes, not outwardly at first, but internally in a way that reshapes every interaction. You begin to move through life with less resistance, not passive, not withdrawn, simply clear. And clarity is magnetic. It reorganizes how you are perceived, how you are treated, and how you treat yourself. Psychology confirms this. When inner alignment is achieved, the brain reduces internal noise, attention sharpens, emotional regulation improves. You become harder to destabilize, not because you are rigid, but because you are rooted. The desire that once felt like a secret now feels like direction. It guides your choices, it informs your boundaries, it keeps you from abandoning yourself in moments when silence once felt easier. You no longer need to push to be seen, you are present, and presence speaks louder than effort ever could. You begin to notice that you are no longer chasing connection from a place of hunger. You are choosing it from a place of fullness. This changes the quality of everything. Love becomes mutual instead of earned. Respect becomes natural instead of negotiated. You no longer shrink to keep others comfortable, and surprisingly, you no longer need others to shrink for you. There is peace in this, but it is not passive peace. It is alive, it has weight. It comes from knowing that no part of you is being exiled to maintain belonging. The desire you once hid no longer needs to demand attention because it is finally integrated. It is not louder, it is steadier. This is the moment when self-trust locks in. You stop questioning your instincts after the fact. You act, then adjust instead of freezing. You accept that not everyone will understand you, and that understanding is no longer the requirement for worth. Research shows that people who operate from internal validation experience greater life satisfaction and emotional stability. Not because they isolate, but because they are no longer fragmented. You also realize something sobering and freeing at the same time. Hiding never truly protected you. It only delayed your return to yourself. And the world did not collapse when you stopped shrinking. In fact, it responded more honestly. Some doors closed, others opened wider than you expected. That is alignment at work. This is not a transformation you announce. It is one you embody, in how you speak, in how you pause, in how you leave situations that no longer fit, in how you stay when they do. You are no longer split between who you are and who you show. That split was the real exhaustion, and now it is gone. The most intense and wild desire you were taught to hide was never about excess. It was about wholeness, about living without amputating parts of yourself to be accepted. And once you experience that kind of integrity, you understand why the desire never stopped knocking. It was not trying to disrupt your life, it was trying to align it, to bring you back into coherence, into strength that does not need to dominate, into softness that does not need to disappear, into a version of yourself that is no longer waiting for permission. This is what happens when truth is no longer managed, negotiated, or minimized. It becomes the ground you stand on, and from that ground you do not need to chase power. You are it. And from that place of grounded power, life no longer feels like something you must brace yourself against. It feels like something you can meet. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, but honestly. The desire that once lived in hiding now lives in motion, not frantic motion, but intentional movement. You choose more consciously. You say yes with your whole body. You say no without rehearsing an apology. This is not hardness. It is clarity finally allowed to exist. The most important shift happens here. You stop measuring yourself through reaction. You no longer wait to see how others respond before you decide how you feel about yourself. Your worth is no longer negotiated in real time. Psychology shows that when identity becomes internally anchored, emotional dependence decreases. You still care, you still connect, but you are no longer hollow without approval. This is where courage becomes sustainable, not the loud kind that burns out quickly, but the quiet kind that keeps showing up. The kind that lets you be misunderstood without collapsing. The kind that lets you be desired without performing. The kind that lets you walk away without proving a point. This courage is not built through force. It is built through alignment repeated over time. You begin to recognize how much energy you once spent monitoring yourself, editing your tone, softening your needs, second-guessing your reactions. That energy now returns to you. It shows up as focus, as vitality, as a deeper connection to your own body and instincts. You feel more here, more present, more awake in your own life. And something unexpected happens. The desire that once felt overwhelming no longer controls you, because desire, when acknowledged, stops shouting. It communicates clearly. It becomes discernment. It tells you what nourishes you and what drains you. It guides you away from situations that require self-erasure and toward those that invite your fullness. This is why reclaiming it was never about indulgence. It was about integration. The desire did not need to be unleashed. It needed to be welcomed home. Once it is, you no longer feel torn between restraint and release. You feel whole, and wholeness is stabilizing. You start to live with fewer internal arguments. Decisions come WI. Less friction. Regret loses its grip because you are no longer acting against yourself. Even when outcomes are uncertain, you trust the choice because it was honest. That trust compounds. It becomes the foundation of self-respect. And self-respect changes everything. It alters the standards you accept, the energy you tolerate, the love you allow. You no longer chase intensity to feel alive because you are already connected to yourself. You no longer confuse longing with depth because you understand the difference between desire and deprivation. This is the final truth. The most intense and wild desire every woman has is not to be wanted by everyone. It is to live without betraying herself, to exist without splitting into acceptable and hidden parts, to be fully alive in her own skin. And once that desire is no longer hidden, life does not become louder. It becomes truer, more grounded, more exact. You stop reaching outward for permission and start moving inward for guidance. You stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing yourself in small, consistent ways. This is not the end of growth. It is the end of pretending, the end of shrinking, the end of negotiating your truth for comfort. From here, action is no longer forced, it is natural. Because when desire and integrity move together, transformation is no longer something you chase. It is something you live.